It's September 6, 1888. The gas lamps of East Boston cast a flickering, uncertain glow on the cobblestone streets. Inside a modest wooden house on Meridian Street, the air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and anticipation. A baby boy is born. His mother, Mary Augusta Hickey, holds him close. His father, Patrick Joseph Kennedy, PJ to his friends, a successful saloon owner and rising star in local Democratic politics, wants to name the boy after himself. Patrick Joseph, a good, strong Irish name. But Mary, savvy and proud, with a keen sense of the subtle codes of this new world, gently reverses the names. Joseph Patrick Kennedy. It sounds less Irish, less like the ghettos they'd fought so hard to escape. She has no idea that this simple act of defiance, this small piece of social engineering, is the first step in forging a dynasty. A dynasty that will conquer America and be conquered by a terrible, relentless darkness. Calling the Kennedys a political family is like calling the Roman Empire a successful startup. It's a staggering understatement. For 64 consecutive years, from the moment John F. Kennedy entered Congress in 1947 until his nephew, Patrick J. Kennedy II, retired in 2011, a Kennedy held a federal elective office in the United States. Let that sink in for a moment. For over 6 decades, through a World War, a Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam, and the dawn of the digital age, one family name was a constant, indelible presence in the halls of power. We're talking about a president, 2 leading presidential candidates, 3 U.S. senators, multiple congressmen, and ambassadors. A level of political dominance America had never seen before and will likely never see again. And then there's the money. The patriarch, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., was one of the richest men in America. When he died in 1969, his fortune was estimated at $500 million. To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of over $4 billion today. This wasn't just wealth, it was a weapon, a war chest of unprecedented scale, designed to fund the conquest of the American political landscape. He built an empire of stocks, real estate, Hollywood studios, and liquor import licenses, all designed for one singular obsessive purpose: to place a son in the White House. But here's what makes the story so chilling, so endlessly fascinating. For every triumph, there is a tragedy. For every inauguration, an assassination. For every celebration, a plane crash. The list of premature, violent, and bizarre deaths is so long, so relentless, it has a name: the Kennedy Curse. A shadow that has stalked the family for generations, devouring its brightest stars and leaving a trail of unimaginable grief. It's a story of ambition so vast it borders on hubris, and of a price so terrible it feels like a biblical reckoning. But why? Why did this one family rise so high, only to fall so hard so many times? Was it a curse? A divine punishment for their sins? Or was the darkness that haunted them a product of their own making, a poison baked into the very foundations of their empire? To answer those questions, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to understand the man who started it all, the architect of the dream, and the author of the curse, Joseph Patrick Kennedy. To understand the Kennedys, you have to understand the world that created Joe Kennedy. It was a world of rigid, unforgiving hierarchies. In late 19th century Boston, the real power, the real money, belonged to the Brahmins, the old money, Protestant elite who could trace their lineage back to the Mayflower. They ran the banks, the law firms, the universities. They looked down from their mansions on Beacon Hill at the teeming, impoverished immigrant neighborhoods below. And no group was more looked down upon than the Irish. The Irish had fled the Great Famine, arriving in Boston with nothing. They were seen as a drunken, diseased, and disorderly underclass. They were the maids, the laborers, the cops on the beat. They were tolerated, but never, ever accepted. Joe Kennedy's own grandparents, Patrick and Bridget, had made that desperate journey from County Wexford in 1849. Patrick worked as a cooper, making barrels on the docks of East Boston before dying of cholera at 35, leaving Bridget to raise 5 children alone. This was the world Joe Kennedy was born into, a world that told him from his first breath that he was second class. While other Irish families were content to climb the ladder of local politics or rung by rung, Joe Kennedy saw it differently. He didn't want to just climb the ladder. He wanted to own it. His father, PJ, was a respected figure in East Boston, a saloon owner who'd made good, a state legislator. He was comfortable. But Joe saw the limits of that comfort. He attended the prestigious Boston Latin School and then Harvard, the inner sanctum of the Brahmin elite. He was a good student and a fine baseball player, but he was never invited to join the exclusive final clubs. He was always an outsider. The Irish kid with a chip on his shoulder, surrounded by the sons of the men who ran the world. That rejection lit a fire in him, a relentless, all-consuming ambition. He wasn't just going to join their world, he was going to beat them at their own game. He once told a friend, "If that's the way the game is played, I'll play it that way." He decided early on that money was the great equalizer. Money didn't care if you were Irish or Protestant. Money was power. And Joe Kennedy was determined to get more of it than any Brahmin could ever dream of. His first move was a masterclass in cunning. At just 25 years old, while working as a state bank examiner, he got wind of a hostile takeover attempt on the Columbia Trust, Boston's only Irish-owned bank. It was a chance for the Brahmin banks to crush their upstart rival. But Joe organized a resistance. He rallied the Irish community, pulled together investors, and fought them off. His reward? He was made the bank's president. At 25, he was the youngest bank president in the country. It was a stunning victory, and it sent a clear message: Joe Kennedy was not a man to be underestimated. In 1914, he made his next strategic move. He married Rose Fitzgerald, the eldest daughter of John "Honey" Fitzgerald, the charismatic, larger-than-life mayor of Boston. It was a union of two of Boston's most powerful Irish families. A merger. Rose was everything Joe wasn't: pious, cultured, and from the pinnacle of Irish-American society. She would provide the social polish, the legitimacy. He would provide the brute force of his ambition. Together, they would be unstoppable. They had 9 children, 9. Joseph Jr., John, Rosemary, Kathleen, Eunice, Patricia, Robert, Jean, and Edward. To the world, they were the perfect Catholic family. But behind the closed doors of their home in Brookline and later in Hyannisport, Joe was a distant and demanding father. He was also a notorious womanizer, carrying on affairs with actresses like Gloria Swanson right under Rose's nose. Rose, devout and stoic, endured the humiliations, focusing her energy on the children. Her role was to raise them. His role was to build the empire they would inherit, and build it he did. Joe Kennedy's rise in the world of finance was nothing short of meteoric. He was a shark in a sea of sharks. He dove into the unregulated stock market of the Roaring '20s, a world of insider trading and market manipulation that was perfectly legal at the time. He mastered the game. He'd form pools with other investors to artificially inflate the price of a stock, get the public to buy in, and then sell, making a killing as the stock crashed. It was ruthless, it was predatory, and it made him a millionaire many times over. Then came the ultimate gamble. As the market soared to dizzying heights in the summer of 1929, everyone was euphoric. But Joe Kennedy felt something was wrong. The shoeshine boy was giving him stock tips. He famously said, "When the shoeshine boys have tips, the market is too popular for its own good." He saw the bubble for what it was, and while everyone else was buying, Joe Kennedy sold. Everything. He cashed out completely just before the great crash of October 1929 wiped out fortunes and plunged the country into the Great Depression. He didn't just survive the crash, he profited from it, short-selling stocks as they plummeted. From there, he moved on to Hollywood, buying and merging film studios. He produced movies, had his affair with Gloria Swanson, and learned the art of shaping public perception. Then, with the end of Prohibition on the horizon, he secured the exclusive American distribution rights for several major brands of scotch and gin. The moment alcohol was legal again, his company, Somerset Importers, was ready. Trucks loaded with liquor were waiting at the border. The money flowed in like a river. By the mid-1930s, Joe Kennedy had done it. He had amassed one of the great fortunes in American history. He had beaten the Brahmins at their own game. He had the money. He had the power. But it wasn't enough. He had been driven by the sting of rejection his entire life, and he knew that no matter how much money he made, the old money establishment would never truly accept him. So he set his sights on a new prize, a prize that could not be denied: the presidency of the United States. But not for him. His past was too controversial, his reputation too tarnished. No, the ultimate prize would be for his sons. He had created the dynasty, he had funded the war chest. Now he would launch the invasion. He would mold his children into political weapons, each one aimed at the heart of the American establishment. He would pour all of his wealth, his cunning, and his ferocious will into their campaigns. He would make one of them president, or destroy the family trying. He had no idea he would end up doing both. Joe Kennedy's plan was as audacious as it was simple: to buy the presidency. He saw politics not as a public service, but as an extension of business, a hostile takeover of the U.S. government, and his firstborn son, Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., was the chosen instrument. Joe Jr. was everything his father wanted in a son: handsome, athletic, charismatic, and a true believer in his father's isolationist politics. He was groomed from birth for the White House. To pave the way, Joe Sr. needed to legitimize himself. He became a major financial backer of Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1932 presidential campaign. His reward was the chairmanship of the newly created Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. The irony was staggering. Roosevelt had appointed the ultimate poacher to be the new gamekeeper. The man who had made his fortune manipulating the market was now in charge of regulating it. Wall Street was outraged, but Joe Kennedy, in one of the great surprises of his career, did a brilliant job. He knew all the tricks because he had invented them. He cleaned up the market, established rules that are still in place today, and earned Roosevelt's trust. His next post was as ambassador to Great Britain in 1937. It was the pinnacle of his ambition. The Irish Catholic kid from East Boston, whose parents had fled the famine, was now the official representative of the United States to the court of St. James's. The Kennedy clan, all 11 of them, descended on London like a royal family. They were a media sensation. But the triumph was short-lived. As Hitler's shadow fell over Europe, Joe Kennedy's core beliefs were exposed. He was an appeaser. He believed that war with Germany was inevitable and that Britain would lose. He made public statements that were seen as defeatist and cowardly. He clashed with Winston Churchill and found himself frozen out of the crucial wartime alliance between Churchill and Roosevelt. He sent his family home for safety while Londoners prepared for the Blitz, a move that was seen as a shocking dereliction of duty. His political career was over. He returned to America in disgrace, a pariah. The dream of a President Kennedy, with him as the power behind the throne, was shattered. He had flown too close to the sun and his wings had melted. But Joe Kennedy was nothing if not resilient. If he couldn't be the king, he would be the kingmaker. He shifted his entire focus, his entire fortune, onto his sons. He famously said, "I'm not interested in what you are. I'm interested in what you're going to be." The pressure on the children was immense. Dinner at the Kennedy compound wasn't a family meal. It was a political science seminar. Joe would grill them on current events, on history, on policy. He pitted them against each other, fostering a relentless competitive spirit. Winning was everything. Second place was failure. Then, the first blow of the curse fell. When America entered World War II, Joe Jr., the heir apparent, enlisted as a Navy pilot. He was determined to be a war hero, to build the perfect resume for his future political career. He flew his required number of missions, earning the right to go home. But it wasn't enough. He needed a final spectacular act of heroism. He volunteered for a top-secret, incredibly dangerous mission, Operation Aphrodite. He was to pilot a bomber packed with 21 pounds of explosives, fly it over the English Channel, aim it at a German V-2 rocket site, and then bail out, letting the plane crash into the target as a remote-controlled bomb. On August 12, 1944, Joe Jr. took off. But something went wrong. 29 minutes into the flight, before he could bail out, the explosives detonated prematurely. The plane and Joe Kennedy Jr. were instantly obliterated. There was nothing left to recover. The golden boy, the future president, was gone. The news devastated Joe Sr. He had lost his son and his dream. The mantle and the crushing weight of his father's ambition now fell to the second son, a boy who had never wanted it, a boy named Jack. John F. Kennedy, or Jack, was a different breed from his older brother. Where Joe Jr. was robust and athletic, Jack was sickly, plagued by a host of ailments that would follow him his entire life. He was charming, witty, and intellectual. He had considered a career as a journalist or a professor. But with Joe Jr. gone, the choice was no longer his. His father made it clear. It was his duty to take his brother's place. The political machine that had been built for Joe Jr. was now retooled for Jack. In 1946, with his father's money and political connections clearing the way, Jack ran for Congress in Massachusetts. He was a war hero in his own right, the commander of the PT-109, which had been sunk in the Pacific. He won easily. The Kennedy dynasty was back in business. He served 3 terms in the House. Then, in 1952, he challenged the incumbent Republican Senator Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. Lodge was the personification of the Boston Brahmin elite that Joe Kennedy so despised. Beating him would be the ultimate revenge. The campaign was a Kennedy production. Joe Sr. poured millions into it. The entire family was mobilized. The Kennedy women, Rose, Eunice, Pat, and John, hosted a series of 33 lavish tea parties across the state, charming tens of thousands of voters. It was a new kind of politics, personal and glamorous. Jack won, unseating a political giant. The victory was a sensation. A Kennedy had taken down a Lodge. The old order was crumbling. As a senator, Jack's star continued to rise. In 1953, he married Jacqueline Bouvier, a beautiful, intelligent, and sophisticated woman from a similar, though less wealthy, social background. Jackie, with her grace and style, added another layer of glamour to the Kennedy mystique. But behind the scenes, their marriage was troubled. Jack was a compulsive womanizer, just like his father, and they suffered private tragedies. In 1956, Jackie gave birth to a stillborn daughter whom they had planned to name Arabella. In 1960, Jack made his move. He announced his candidacy for President of the United States. The campaign was a juggernaut, powered by Kennedy money and Kennedy charisma. He faced down the anti-Catholic prejudice that had doomed Al Smith's campaign in 1928, delivering a masterful speech on the separation of church and state. He debated his Republican opponent, Richard Nixon, in the first-ever televised presidential debates. On television, the young, handsome, and confident Kennedy ran circles around the pale, sweating Nixon. Those who listened on the radio thought Nixon won, but those who watched on television, the vast majority of Americans, knew Kennedy had. He won the election by one of the narrowest margins in American history. Just over 100,000 votes out of 68 million cast, but it was enough. On January 20th, 1961, John F. Kennedy was sworn in as the 35th President of the United States. Joe Kennedy's dream had been realized. His son was in the White House. The Irish kid from Boston had conquered America. It was the family's greatest triumph, a moment of pure, unadulterated victory. But the curse was waiting, and the higher they climbed, the further they had to fall. The Kennedy presidency was like something out of a fairy tale. The White House was nicknamed Camelot. It was a time of youth, vigor, and glamour. Jack and Jackie were the most famous couple in the world. Their 2 young children, Caroline and John Jr., played in the Oval Office. The administration was filled with the best and the brightest, a new generation of leaders ready to take on the challenges of the Cold War. It was a time of immense hope and optimism. Jack appointed his younger brother, Robert, or Bobby, as Attorney General. The appointment was controversial. Bobby was only 35 and had little legal experience, but Jack trusted him, implicitly. Bobby became his brother's closest advisor, his enforcer, his conscience. The 2 brothers, working in tandem, were the heart of the administration. The 3rd surviving brother, Ted, was elected to Jack's old Senate seat in 1962 at the age of 30. The Kennedy political machine was at the peak of its power. But the fairy tale had a dark side. The Cold War was at its most dangerous. The Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 was a humiliating failure. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation. And behind the glamorous facade of Camelot, the family was still being stalked by tragedy. But the first, and perhaps most hidden tragedy had occurred years earlier, and it revealed the terrifying ruthlessness at the heart of Joe Kennedy's ambition. Rosemary Kennedy, the third child, was born in 1918. She was beautiful, but it was clear from an early age that she was different. She was slower to develop than her siblings. Today, she would likely be diagnosed with a learning disability, perhaps exacerbated by a difficult birth, where a nurse, waiting for the doctor to arrive, forced her to remain in the birth canal for 2 hours, depriving her of oxygen. In the hyper-competitive Kennedy household, Rosemary's struggles were a source of shame and embarrassment. She couldn't keep up. She was a flaw in the perfect family portrait. As she grew into a young woman, her behavior became more erratic. She was prone to mood swings and violent outbursts. The family worried she would do something to cause a scandal, to tarnish the Kennedy name, and jeopardize the political careers of her brothers. In 1941, Joe Kennedy made a secret unilateral decision. He was told of a new miraculous surgical procedure that could calm her moods, a prefrontal lobotomy. He didn't tell his wife. He didn't consult with other doctors. He simply arranged it. At the age of 23, Rosemary Kennedy was strapped to a table. The doctors drilled holes into her skull. She was asked to sing songs and recite prayers as they cut away at the front lobes of her brain. They stopped when she became incoherent. The procedure was a catastrophe. It didn't cure her, it destroyed her. It left her with the mental capacity of a 2-year-old. She couldn't walk or speak coherently. She was incontinent. She was gone. Joe Kennedy's reaction was swift and brutal. He had his damaged daughter institutionalized and erased her from the family's public life. For years, her siblings didn't even know where she was. She was hidden away in a Catholic facility in Wisconsin, where she remained for the rest of her life until her death in 2005. It was the family's darkest secret, a human sacrifice on the altar of ambition. The story of Rosemary is the first and perhaps the most chilling chapter in the story of the Kennedy curse. It shows a family so obsessed with its public image that it was willing to destroy one of its own to protect it. 4 years after Rosemary's lobotomy, another tragedy struck. Kathleen "Kick" Kennedy, the fourth child, was the family's rebel. She was vivacious, charming, and independent. During her father's time as ambassador, she fell in love with a British nobleman, William Cavendish, the Marquis of Hartington. He was a Protestant and the heir to the dukedom of Devonshire. Rose was horrified. A Kennedy marrying a Protestant was unthinkable, but Kick defied her mother and married him in 1944. Just 4 months later, her husband was killed in action in Belgium, shot by a German sniper. Widowed at 24, Kick remained in England. A few years later, she fell in love again, this time with another wealthy married Protestant aristocrat, Earl Fitzwilliam. In May 1948, the two of them were flying in a small private plane to the south of France when they hit a violent storm. The plane crashed, killing everyone on board. Kick was 28 years old. Of all the Kennedy children, only her father, Joe Sr., attended her funeral. The rest of the family, led by the unforgiving Rose, stayed away. 2 children were now gone, one hidden away, the other in a grave in a foreign land. Even in the White House, the shadow of death was never far away. In August 1963, Jackie Kennedy gave birth to a son, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, 5.5 weeks prematurely. He was born with a severe lung ailment, now known as infant respiratory distress syndrome. He fought for his life for 39 hours. The president, his face etched with grief, rushed to his side, but there was nothing the most powerful man in the world could do. Patrick died on August 9th. The image of the grieving president, a father who had lost his child, was heartbreaking. The nation mourned with him. It was a moment of shared vulnerability, a crack in the armor of Camelot. And then came Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. The president was in Texas on a political trip, trying to heal a rift in the state's Democratic Party. He was riding in an open-top limousine through Dealey Plaza, Jackie beside him in her iconic pink suit. The crowds were cheering, the sun was shining, and then the shots rang out. The first shot hit him in the throat. The second, fatal shot, struck him in the head. The dream died. Camelot was shattered. The world watched in horror as the fairy tale turned into a nightmare on live television. The assassination of John F. Kennedy was a national trauma, a wound that has never fully healed. For the Kennedy family, it was an unimaginable cataclysm. Joe Kennedy, who had suffered a debilitating stroke in 1961 that left him unable to speak, could only watch, mute and helpless, as the news of his son's murder unfolded on television. He had outlived the son he had placed in the White House. The curse had claimed its greatest prize. After Jack's death, the family and the nation looked to Bobby. He was the inheritor of the Kennedy legacy, the keeper of the flame. The assassination had changed him. The ruthless, aggressive Attorney General was gone. In his place was a more introspective, compassionate man, one who now understood suffering in a profound way. He resigned as Attorney General and in 1964 ran for the Senate in New York. He won, and for a time, he and his younger brother Ted served together in the Senate. But even before Bobby could fully step into his brother's shoes, the curse struck again. In June 1964, just 7 months after the assassination, Ted Kennedy was flying to the Democratic State Convention in Massachusetts. The small plane he was in crashed in an apple orchard. The pilot and one of Ted's aides were killed. Ted was pulled from the wreckage by his fellow senator, Birch Bayh. He had a broken back, a punctured lung, broken ribs, and internal bleeding. He spent 5 months in the hospital, recovering. It was after this crash that Bobby reportedly said to an aide, "Somebody up there doesn't like us." By 1968, the country was in turmoil. The Vietnam War was raging. There were riots in the cities. Lyndon Johnson, Jack's successor, was deeply unpopular. Bobby Kennedy, who had become a powerful voice against the war, saw his moment. He announced his candidacy for president. It was a campaign of extraordinary passion and energy. He forged a powerful coalition of the poor, the young, and minority voters. He seemed destined to win the Democratic nomination and reclaim the White House for his family. On the night of June 4, 1968, he won the crucial California primary. It was a massive victory. After giving a triumphant speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, he was being led through the hotel's kitchen pantry. And there, in a crowded, chaotic hallway, a 24-year-old Palestinian immigrant named Sirhan Sirhan stepped forward with a .22 caliber revolver and opened fire. Bobby was shot in the head. He died 26 hours later. He was 42 years old. It was too much. The country and the family were plunged back into the abyss of grief. 2 brothers, 2 leaders, 2 hopes for a better future, assassinated in less than 5 years. It was no longer just a series of tragedies. It felt like a pattern, a malevolent force deliberately targeting the family. The idea of a Kennedy curse, which had been whispered about for years, now became a national obsession. It seemed the only rational explanation for such an irrational run of horror. With Bobby gone, the weight of the dynasty fell on the last surviving brother, Ted. He was now the patriarch of the family, the guardian of his brother's children, the keeper of the political legacy. It was a burden he was ill-equipped to carry, and just a year after Bobby's death, Ted would face his own personal crisis, an incident that would destroy his presidential ambitions and forever define his public image. It happened on the night of July 18, 1969, on the tiny island of Chappaquiddick off Martha's Vineyard. Ted had attended a party for a group of young women who had worked on Bobby's 1968 campaign. Late that night, he left the party with one of them, a 28-year-old woman named Mary Jo Kopechny. He was driving his car when he somehow drove off a narrow, unlit wooden bridge. The car flipped over and landed in the tidal pond below. Ted managed to escape the submerged car. Kopechny did not. And here is where the story turns from a tragic accident into a political scandal. Ted Kennedy did not report the accident. He walked back to the cottage where the party was, passed by several houses with lights on, and told 2 friends what had happened. They returned to the scene, but claimed they were unable to rescue Kopechny. Then, Ted returned to his hotel in Edgartown. He He did not call the police until the next morning, after the car and Kopechny's body had been discovered by a fisherman. The questions were immediate and damning. Why did he wait so long to report the accident? Was he drunk? Was he trying to cover something up? A week later, Ted gave a televised address to the nation. He gave a rambling, unconvincing account of the night's events, and then he uttered the words that gave the curse its official name. He said he wondered whether some awful curse did actually hang over all the Kennedys. It was a stunning moment. A United States senator, a member of America's most famous family, seemingly blaming his own failings on a supernatural force. Ted Kennedy pleaded guilty to a charge of leaving the scene of an accident. He was given a 2-month suspended sentence, but the real sentence was political. Chappaquiddick ended any serious chance he had of ever becoming president. The incident and his handling of it created a cloud of suspicion that would follow him for the rest of his life. The curse, whether real or imagined, had claimed another victim. It had not killed Ted, but it had killed his dream and the dream of his father. The tragedies did not stop with that generation. The curse seemed to pass down to the children. In 1973, Joe Kennedy II, Bobby's son, crashed a car, leaving a female passenger paralyzed for life. In 1984, another of Bobby's sons, David, who had been haunted by his father's assassination, died of a drug overdose in a Florida hotel room. He was 28. In 1997, a third son of Bobby, Michael, was killed in a bizarre skiing accident in Aspen when he crashed into a tree while playing football on skis. He was 39. And then, in 1999, the curse returned to the line of JFK. John F. Kennedy Jr., the little boy who had saluted his father's casket, had grown up to be a handsome, charismatic man, the publisher of a political magazine, and the closest thing America had to a crown prince. On a hazy July evening, he was piloting his small private plane, flying with his wife, Carolyn Bessette, and her sister Lauren to a family wedding in Hyannisport. He was an inexperienced pilot, and he became disoriented in the darkness over the water. The plane spiraled into the Atlantic Ocean, killing all three. The son of Camelot was gone. The last best hope for a new generation of Kennedy leadership was extinguished. So we return to the central question. Why? Why this family? Is there really a curse, a malevolent force that has haunted the Kennedys for a century? Or is there a more rational and perhaps more disturbing explanation? Skeptics argue that the curse is simply a matter of statistics and perception. The Kennedys are a huge family. Over dozens of cousins in multiple generations, it's statistically probable that there will be accidents, illnesses, and premature deaths. And because they are the Kennedys, every tragedy is magnified, reported on, and woven into the narrative of the curse. Other families suffer tragedies, but they do so in private. The Kennedys have had to live their lives and their deaths on the world stage. There's also the element of risk. The Kennedys are a family of daredevils. They sail in dangerous waters. They ski recklessly. They fly small planes. They live life on the edge. That love of risk, that sense of invincibility, is part of what makes them so compelling, but it also dramatically increases their chances of meeting a tragic end. Joe Jr.'s fatal flight, Michael's skiing accident, JFK Jr.'s plane crash, these were not bolts from the blue. They were the predictable outcomes of risky behavior. But there's a deeper, more unsettling theory, that the curse is not an external force, but an internal one. That the seeds of the family's destruction were planted by the patriarch himself. Joe Kennedy's relentless ambition, his creed of winning at all costs, his willingness to break the rules, he passed this on to his children. He gave them immense wealth and privilege, but he also burdened them with an impossible weight of expectation. He taught them to be fearless, but perhaps he also taught them to be reckless. He created a culture of entitlement and impunity, a belief that the normal rules didn't apply to them. Look at Chappaquiddick, Ted Kennedy's actions that night. The panic, the indecision, the instinct for self-preservation over duty can be seen as the dark inheritance of his father's ethos. The belief that the most important thing was to control the narrative, to manage the scandal, to protect the family name. The tragedy of Mary Jo Kopechne was secondary. The real curse, some might argue, is the moral rot that can come with immense power and privilege, and the tragedies have continued into the 21st century. In 2012, Mary Richardson Kennedy, the estranged wife of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., died by suicide. In 2019, Serse Kennedy Hill, Bobby's granddaughter, died of an accidental drug overdose at the Kennedy compound. She was 22. And in 2020, another of Bobby's granddaughters, Maeve Kennedy McKean, and her 8-year-old son, Gideon, drowned in a canoeing accident in the Chesapeake Bay. The litany of loss is staggering, and yet the family endures. Ted Kennedy, despite the shadow of Chappaquiddick, went on to become one of the most effective and consequential senators in American history, a liberal lion who championed causes from civil rights to health care. Eunice Kennedy Shriver, inspired by the secret tragedy of her sister Rosemary, founded the Special Olympics, a global movement that has transformed the lives of millions of people with intellectual disabilities. The next generation of Kennedys continues to serve in politics, in public service, and in activism. The story of the Kennedys is the ultimate American epic. It's a story of immigration, ambition, and assimilation. It's a story of triumph and tragedy, of glamour and grief, of public service and private sin. It's a story about the intoxicating allure of power and its terrible, corrosive price. The curse, in the end, may not be supernatural. It may be the very human story of a father who wanted too much, who pushed his children to fly too close to the sun, and who created a dynasty so brilliant that it couldn't help but cast a long, dark, and inescapable shadow. They were America's royal family, and they paid a royal price. Their story is a cautionary tale, a Greek tragedy played out on the American stage. It reminds us that even for those who seem to have everything, wealth, power, and fame, the fundamental human experiences of loss and suffering are unavoidable. The Kennedys reached for the stars, and for a brief, shining moment, they touched them. But they also learned that the price of that ambition, the price of that power, can be a darkness from which there is no escape.